Hello, hello. So I think we're going to start because I believe we're supposed to start now. So we're going to try and keep things on time. So welcome if you're in this room. This is the College Fit Workshop. This is the Silver Maple Room. If you're looking for the Sugar Maple Room, it's on the other side of that wall, so you got to go around. So this workshop is about kind of taking some steps to think about where you might want to go to school after you graduate from high school. So we're going to look at a whole variety of factors that you might take into account. We'll give you a chance to answer some questions, to take some time to think about it. Ideally, by the end of this, maybe you as a student have taken some time to think about what are some factors that really matter to me, because there really are a lot of factors that go into it. I'll do a quick introduction for myself, but first, for students in here, how many of you have like done any kind of search to like try and narrow down like a list of schools or anything? Has anybody done that? No one. Oh, a couple of people have. Great. So you're going to want to do that at some point, and we'll give you some tips on how to do that. So my name is Matt Bourgault, otherwise known as Beagle. That's what folks have called me for a long time. I work for VSAC. I direct the Talent Search Program, which is a program that's around the state. We have counselors in high schools and middle schools that are basically trying to help people figure out what their future plans are. VSAC has folks who are around the state who work with students in middle schools, high schools, who work with adults. So that's one of those programs. And then also we have David over here. I'm gonna let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Richardson. I am a Gear Up intern through VSAC. So I work for VSAC as well as I go to school here. I'm a junior. I'm a political science and economics major here in the Honors College.
Great. So Dave is going to give some perspective on his own experience as a student. So it's not just coming from me, who didn't go to school more recently. So hopefully that'll help too. So I've been working with students for a long time. So hopefully my perspective will be useful from that end. And hopefully David could give you some of his perspective. Obviously, it's not universal. Your experience could be different. But so we're going to try this little clicker here. Make sure it actually works. Maybe not. There we go. All right. So you should have one of these. So there's a little handout pile over there. If you don't have one of these, this might be helpful. We're going to reference this as we go. So this little sheet, the college comparison chart, lists a whole bunch of things that you might want to think about as you're thinking about where you might want to go to school. Now, one thing to be aware of, so we put this on here, college comparison chart. For the most part, a lot of students are thinking about going to college. We want to make sure that definition is broad enough, because it's not necessarily like just the four-year college that you think about, that you've like seen the movies with fraternities and so on. UVM, yes, is a college you might want to go to. There are other schools that are two-year programs, smaller, different parts of the country. There's a huge variety, so keep that in mind. All right, so as an example, there's some things that you could think about in terms of what kind of school are you looking at. So one thing to consider is, what do you want to get out of it in terms of some kind of a degree or credential? So one possibility is to get something like a certificate or short-term training credential that could be a month, could be a year, could be 2 years. It's not necessarily what you'd call a degree. It might be a certificate or some kind of credential, but it's a training program that's going to get you somewhere closer to a career. A 2-year school is what might get you an associate's degree. So just make sure you have the language here. So a 2-year degree is if you're a full-time student for 2 years, you might get an associate's degree. That might be a stepping stone or a pathway to a 4-year degree, which we call a bachelor's degree. So for some students, they're going to dive into a short-term program. For some, they're going to say, I'm going to do a 2-year program to start, or that's all I want. Some might go on and say, I'm going to go right into a bachelor's degree program. And then there are programs, just so you know, some of you may know this, that are 5-year combined programs. So there may be something like, let's just say pharmacy science. You want to be a pharmacist. That requires you get a bachelor's degree, and then it requires you continue and get another degree. So if you do it separately, it's going to take you 6 years. But there are some schools that say, hey, we know you want to get this eventually. Let's overlap some of that learning for your bachelor's degree and your master's degree. We'll do it in 5 years. So what that requires typically is you're going to go on, it's very specific. You know you're going to do it. It's like a strict program of studies, but it gets you that advanced degree in a shorter amount of time. So another term is a university. So UVM is, believe it or not, a university, the University of Vermont. Typically, a university is a larger institution, and they have more programs. Now, that's not universal, but that's kind of a general thing. Often universities offer advanced degrees like master degrees or beyond. So it's just a factor to consider because maybe that's the kind of school you want. And then one thing to think about is, do you want to study something that's specialized or generalized? So maybe you want to go into nursing. It's very specific, it's specialized. You're going to get your registered nurse certificate and your degree, and you go on from there. Maybe you're going to study something like psychology, which is very broad. It could potentially give you lots of opportunities down the road. So do you want to study something that's very specific, or do you want to study something that's more broad? And then another thing to think about is, do you want to go to a campus? Now, my guess is if some of you are here, you're on a campus, you may be thinking, I want to go to some campus somewhere to study. That's kind of the traditional way. Lots of options now to study online, either fully online or partly online. So some students will take part in programs where they're going to classes and they're doing some online classes as well. So it's one thing to think about, what kind of program do you want? For some folks, fully online is what they want. Other folks, no way, I want to be on campus. All right, so we're going to ask you a few questions out there. So this can be a helpful thing if you're in the room, or if you are at home, maybe you want to jot down some notes on this college comparison chart. So it could be something you can then have with you afterwards. So one thing to think about here, so you got a question: would you rather attend classes in person where you can make strong connections with your classmates and instructor, but have a strict class schedule, or would you rather take mostly online courses? So think to yourself, like, what would you rather do? So take a minute to think about it. And while you're thinking about it, David is going to share his experience of how he answered that question.
Yeah, so when I came to the university, I wanted to be in person. I graduated from high school in spring of 21. If you know anything about 2020 to 2021, we were online. And I didn't really want to do that too much anymore, as obviously I assume many don't anymore after that traumatic experience. So I chose to be in person here, and it was great. I got to meet a lot of great people, not only through classes, but my on-campus work study job, and meet great instructors, people who are at the top of their field, people who end up being my advisor, who was the former president of this university. So it was a great way to meet people at the top of your field, great to get your foot in the door with internships and opportunities, letters of recommendation, etc.
All right, so take a second, just write something down for yourself. Would you rather, how would you answer this question that's on the screen here? It's okay to have a conversation with someone next to you about this too, if you'd like to do that. You have permission. It's not a library. All right, so in the nature of time, we're going to do this a couple of times, so it's okay to keep thinking about it while I'm blathering or giving the information, or there's stuff to look at on the screen. Anybody want to share? What would they rather and why? Not required, but if you want to, we have a couple mic runners here. Rose is over here with a mic. David's got one, so if you want to share, just let them know and you can speak into the microphone. If you're online, you can put it in the chat. So I'm never going to hear that because Rose did not take the advice. I just suggested of using the mic. So take advantage of opportunity to talk to each other.
Oh yeah, it is. Sorry. Yeah, I'm very quiet. But yes, take advantage of the opportunity to talk to each other through these questions, talk with your family. Yeah, if you're comfortable sharing, yeah.
All right, you'll get another chance. We'll go on. All right. So another thing to think about is what are you going to study and academic programs out of school. So some questions up here to be thinking about in terms of that. It could be just, what do I want to learn more about? Maybe you took a class in high school, you did a college class when you're in high school, or just something that you learned about through a summer program or a job. You're like, I would really love to learn more about that. There may be a way for you to study that when you move on to your education after high school. What subjects of interest to you in high school? Maybe that's something you want to continue. Programs of study that fit your style or goal. So that, again, is something like, well, maybe it's online. Maybe you really love to work with computers. You want to go into game design program. You just want to do computer science, something like that. Or you say, I love to be outside. I want to find a program where I can study and be outside and have a career where I get to be outside. How do you hope to fit that into your overall educational plan? Maybe you're thinking, I want to be a doctor someday. That's a big long-term educational journey. So what do I do right now? How does that fit into the bigger goal? And what if you have no idea? So it's okay not to know. So one thing to be aware of is that if you are a junior in high school right now, and I'm guessing several of you are, you do not need to know what you're going to do. It's very possible that what you've heard is your peers, other students out there, and they're like, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this and this and this, and they have a plan, and you don't, and you think, I have no idea. It's okay not to know. Plenty of students don't know what they're going to study right away. Plenty of students think they know what they're going to study. I worked with a student who, like, starting in 8th grade was like, marine biology, I'm going to do that, all the way through the fall of senior year. And then, like, in December, she's like, I really don't want to do that. You know, she's been telling herself this whole time, this is what I want to do. It's okay to change your mind. And people will go to school and they will study something and realize that's not what they want to do. Now they've had a chance to really dive into it. They realize this isn't for me either. It's okay to change. So you have options to do this. You have no idea, that's fine. You can have the opportunity to go on to school, whether it's somewhat narrow or really broad, and then narrow it down once you do that. All right. So another question for you. Would you rather go to a school that encourages you to explore many classes and fields of study, or dive right into your field of interest? The reason that question is here is because, again, some schools say, we don't want you to tell us specifically what you're going to study. Tell us that after your first year. And then others where you're applying to a specific program, and from day one, you are in that field of study and you're taking classes in that. So take a second to answer that question for yourself.
Yeah, so when I was applying to university, I was applying for 4-year programs, and a lot of the programs or universities I was applying to, you know, being liberal arts, they encourage studying a variety of different classes in different fields, taking a foreign language, etc. And if you decide to come here, you'll take the Catamount core curriculum, which also encourages that. However, I chose to come here, obviously, and so I took a variety of different classes. That isn't to say, however, my freshman year when I did come here, I was able to dive right into the material that I wanted, and was able to dive right into political science stuff, able to dive right into economics, and I was able to make an impression early, not only with my professors, but really long-term decide what I was going to do. So.
Excellent. And just to be clear on one term that Dave threw out there, liberal arts, it's often a term that's used for a school that has a whole variety of things to study, and they're going to make you study something in a lot of different fields. So you have to take maybe a math class, a science class. It's not necessarily the field of study you're going to take, but they want you to get a broad range of studies so you can integrate that into everything that you're studying in the end. And you will focus it, but to start off with, they want you to study something broad.
When I started out, I had no clue what I was going to do. I came here to Vermont by myself without parents or the help of any family, and I was deemed an independent of the state after living here a year. And VSAC helped me through the program and outreach counselors decide what pathway I wanted to take. So I didn't right away know either. And it's okay to explore that. It's okay to not know. It's okay to go to different opportunities you have to explore whether you want to be a hairstylist or an artist or a nurse or engineer. So we're here to help you answer those questions. It's not easy.
Anybody want to share their answer to that question? It's a shy group today. That's all right. We'll let you get away with it today. All right. So another factor, and again, if you have this sheet, you can go down here and you can see, oh, we're somewhat following this in order. So again, these are all things to be thinking about. So the idea with this chart is you can use this for yourself, not just today, but down the road as you're thinking about like, I hadn't really thought about that. It's a question for you to try and answer as you go. So the size of a school is a big factor for a lot of students because it can really vary. I mean, you might have a school that has 40,000 students. There isn't one of those in Vermont. Or you could have a school that's 300 students. I mean, that's a huge difference in terms of the campus culture. So what size of campus do you want to think about? On this slide, you can see a small school typically when you're talking about college, and like if you do a college search, you know, if you use a college search program and they say, pick a small school and it says under 5,000, like there is not a high school in Vermont that is big according to this criteria. Like it's, you know, every school in Vermont is smaller than a small college by this definition. Now, that's a huge range, but it's one thing to think about, like, because I've heard students say, I'm going to go to a really big school. It's just like, well, if you go to a school that has 3 times as many students as your high school, it's still considered a small school. So it is something to think about. Don't just use the language on the search feature, but think about like, what does that really mean? Do you want to be in a place where there's a lot of students and you're just maybe not going to know most of the people, but you still have a chance to make a lot of friends, or a community that's smaller where you might get to know your professors more, you might get to meet students more. And just the size of the campus too, like if it's in a big city, you know, you might have to travel far to get to your class. So it's going to take you a little bit to get there, or it's literally around the corner. You wake up and you walk 2 buildings down and you go to class. So those are the kinds of things to be thinking about in terms of size. And then this last question on here, you know, do you want to be a big fish in a little pond or a little fish in a big pond? For some folks, it's like, you know, I want to go to a school that's really big and nobody knows me. I want to be able to disappear and do my own thing and know there are people around me who are really different than me. And for other folks, it's, you know, I want to make sure I can be part of this community, and a small school is going to help me do that. So that's sort of the size piece. All right. And then location and the campus atmosphere is aside just from the skies. So if you're in a city like Montreal, there's some amazing universities in Montreal. That is very different than if you go to a school like Sterling College, which is up in the Northeast Kingdom and really tiny. So one thing to think about is, do you want to like think about, oh, do I want to be someplace that's really similar to what I know or not that different because I'm going to be more comfortable? Maybe you want something that's extremely different experience. It's far away. It's in a big city, whatever it may be. The other thing is transportation. If you go to school in California, it's going to be very different, but travel is an effort. It's not just like, you know, you go to school in Maine, it's like a few hours drive, you're there. You can come home. You can come home for a weekend if you need to. But if you're in California and you're going to come home for the holidays, you know, you get on a plane, it's going to take you all day to get here. There's an extra cost associated with that. What if there's bad weather and you're delayed? Like, there are just more things and different things to think about. And maybe that's fine. But if that's a barrier for you and you say, I don't want to deal with that, it's just a factor to consider. So it's something to think about. Do you want to be close to home, or are you going to like just get home when you need to? Do you want to live at home? Do you want to be super far away, somewhere in the middle? So all those are things to think about. Campus tours is a great resource for you. Recommend going on campus tours, but you can get online and do that, or go in person. If you can get on a college campus, it's a great way to find out, does it fit with what you're looking for? So would you rather go to a school where campus is integrated into a city, but there might be less a sense of a campus community, or a school that has a close-knit, strong campus community that's not very connected to the town? They're campuses that are very separate from the town they're in. So think to yourself, what would you rather do? Got an answer, David?
Yeah, I think this is really unique, especially here at the university, because it's kind of in the middle. And I obviously applied to a lot of different schools, things that had campuses that were very isolated. I'm from St. Johnsbury, so if you talk about Linden, it's kind of just like, and it's a little like, if you're talking about VTSU Linden, which it is now, it's kind of like isolated in Linden, you know, has its like own little campus community. UVM is really interesting because it has both. You can be kind of, I've never, like, up until I interned for the Congresswoman last summer, I never went downtown. I chose to do that for a variety of reasons, but you can kind of be isolated here and be a part of a really strong campus community, but you can also be really well connected to the town. So this school in particular is really unique in that, which you could get the best of both worlds.
Anybody have a thought they want to share about the answer to this question? Maybe I should just stop asking. It's ridiculous. All right, it's fine. Part of this is just for you to be thinking about it, so that's okay. You don't have to share. All right, so another question for you. Would you rather attend a school where most students live together in dorms and you have the opportunities to make maybe a whole lot of new friends, even in your dorm? Or would you rather attend a school where most people live off campus and you're not paying the school for housing and meals? So I mentioned Montreal. You want to go to McGill University in Montreal. They don't even have student housing. It's a city. There are plenty of places to live. They have someone there who will help you find housing, especially if you're a first-year student, but they don't have their own housing. And then you have a place like UVM where there's plenty of campus housing. You live right on campus. So take a second to think about that. Would you rather live off campus or on campus?
Yeah, so when I was applying to school, I wanted to live on campus. Living off campus associated with a lot of different costs that necessarily coming from a low income family, I didn't have the money to put down $1,000 security deposit for an off-campus apartment or something along the lines of that, where I was able to live on campus at UVM and I was able to be a part of a campus community, et cetera. UVM is also really unique in this case where you're a junior, you're no longer allowed to live on campus unless you have an accommodation to do so, which I do. So I live on campus still, and it's been great. So yeah, that's something to also think about in this instance.
Another thing to consider too is, I mean, UVM is a great example of this where students start living on campus and then maybe they do that for 2 years and then they live off campus. And that's true for a lot of schools that even if they have housing on campus, students will choose to find an apartment, they live with friends to just have a different experience wherever they are. So, all right. So selectivity in academics, another thing to think about, first of all, is can you get in? So every school you have to apply to, and it can vary in terms of selectivity. So what that means is lots of people apply, not everyone gets accepted at every school. Now, there are some schools where they take most everyone. Community colleges, for example, you can attend if you want to. Other schools are extremely selective. So the most selective schools, you know, they're going to take like single-digit percentages, 8% of applicants get in, that kind of thing. Now, those are the exception, but programs can also be very selective. So students I worked with who want to study nursing, for example, I say it's really hard to get into anywhere if you want to study nursing because it is so competitive right now. So apply to, 8 schools. Make sure you apply to a lot because you want to give yourself a chance to get in. And then there are other programs like something that's very broad, like sociology, say. Lots of students want to study that, but programs have lots of space to be able to do that because they don't need specific facilities and so on. So if you're thinking of a specific major or field of study, you do want to look at, is it selective at a particular school? And also the school overall, is it just generally selective? Another piece to think about is scholarship or merit aid. So merit aid it's basically a scholarship you get, helps you pay for school. A school can give you this depending on whatever criteria they have. So often you'll apply, if your academics are good enough, they'll say, hey, great, we're going to give you this scholarship to entice you to come here. So it's another thing to think about, like, are you the kind of student who might get some financial aid, some money from the school based on who you are as an applicant? It could be academics, athletics, any number of things that's available. You have a question?
How would you know what those selectivity criteria is for any school?
All right, so how would you know? It's a good question. There are a variety of tools you can use. College Board, for example, has a search feature. Some of the programs that you might be familiar with as a student, like Naviance or SCORE, they have a search feature. And essentially what it is you go in and you can enter all these questions. We'll say, well, what size of school do you want? Small, medium, large? What field of study are you interested in? What states do you want to look at? Any number of factors. And you plug that in, it will give you a list of schools. That's partly why we encourage you to use something like this, because if you go to like a college search tool and you don't put in anything, you'll get like 5,000 schools. That's just way too many to consider. So you want to narrow it down. You have a further question?
So I'm going to dive deeper on that. So let's say my student is really into international studies and political science. So based upon those programs, how would you dig deeper into the programmatic selectivity at colleges? Is that also going to be on Naviance and at the College Board?
So some of the search tools that you might use are going to give you that information. There are a couple other tools. There's one called College Scorecard, and these links are all like in the notes and handouts that we have available, and it's on the website link. If you go back to the VSAC CCP link, all this stuff is in there. But College Scorecard's a great one because you can look up a particular school and it will show you how many applicants typically apply or applied last year and what's the number of students that got accepted. It doesn't always dig down by program, so that's something you'd have to go to a school and ask. So if you have a particular interest in a particular program, you might have to go talk to someone in admissions at a particular school to say, hey, I'm interested in this program. How selective is it? What are my chances of getting it? So yeah, there's some easy online tools like College Scorecard to be able to get some of that selectivity information. All right, another thing is just to get information from people teachers, school counselors. Maybe they have experience with those schools. They've known other students who have applied. They applied themselves. So, seek out information from people that you know. But again, thing to be thinking about is how hard is it to get in? And is it hard to get into a particular program? Are you a good fit for that? Another thing to be thinking about on campus, or even if you're living off campus, is student life. So student life is kind of a term for things that students might be able to do, have available to them that is not necessarily academic. So this is clubs, theater, sports teams, spaces on campus that students can gather, hang out, and do things. So housing and meals obviously is a big part of that because you're living there. If you're living on campus, how diverse is the student body, of course, is going to matter in different ways to different people. And then just what can you do on campus? I mean, UVM has a ton of stuff that you can do. Lots of other schools have tons of stuff that you can do, even if they're really small. So it's another thing to look into. And that's the kind of thing you'd find on a school's website. You can dig down and see like, well, what's available? And if you go on a tour, that's another great question to ask. Like, well, what happens here? What do you do when you're on campus? And then just in general, how do students spend their time? Does everybody go to the football game on Saturday when that happens, or does hardly anybody do that? Or maybe there isn't even a football team. So it's just all those kinds of things, like what matters to you in terms of things that are available on campus. And then again, housing and facilities. So do they have housing on campus is one thing. If they do, then what is that like? Is it giant dorms? Is it old buildings that are sort of funky? What does that look like for you? Do most students live on campus? Is it the kind of campus where even if students live on campus, half of students leave for the weekend and they're not around on the weekend? So all those kinds of questions are helpful to ask. Sometimes housing can be like theme-based. So it could be based on folks in a particular major. It could be based on like a wellness housing, people who are just interested in a particular lifestyle or they have a common interest. So that's another thing to think about. It's not true for every school. And then other facilities. What other facilities? Do they have comedians come to campus because there's a venue for that students tend to go to? Is there like a cafe on campus? Any number of things. So those are the kind of things you can find on the website, you can find on a tour, you can find from talking to students who have been there and so on. Okay, so would you rather go to a school that has all kinds of clubs and interesting things for you to do, but it's not your dream school? Or would you rather say, it's my dream school, it meets every other criteria, but it doesn't really have a lot of other things to do? Which would you rather do? Can I answer?
I think something interesting here is what defines as your dream school. I think that's an interesting question. I chose to come, UVM by any means wasn't my dream school. There was a lot of things that a lot of reasons I chose to come here. Some of them were financial related. I chose to come here also. I didn't decide where I was going to go to school until the day before the decision deadline. I had two really good, basically full offer rides from St. Mike's and UVM. I toured both colleges the day before the May 1st deadline. And on the ride home, I said, I think I picture myself at UVM because of, the student government opportunities, co-governance. You have really great, like say political science club, for example, getting to meet with local politicians and public servants from around the state. So I chose to come here because of the student life, because I could be involved in a lot of these opportunities, like being a senator for student government, like being in clubs like political science club or economics club or things of that sort. So that's sort of something to think about.
Excellent. I'm also looking at the clock and realizing this is a lot of information to throw out to you. I'm going to throw a little bit more to you, and Dave's going to share a little bit more. But again, take some time to think about these questions. Here's another one for you. Would you rather go to a school in a place that looks and feels like Vermont? You're from Vermont. You want something similar. Maybe you want to stay right here. Maybe you live in Burlington. You want to go to UVM. Or do you want to go to a school that's very different? It's a different environment, different location, far away maybe. So another question to think about. Why did you choose that?
So I chose to stay at a school in Vermont. I had applied to schools out of state. However, they were very expensive, having out of state tuition. I chose to stay here. I'm from St. Johnsbury. Both my parents are very sick. So I chose to stay here so I could go and visit them on the weekends if they were ever in the hospital and things of that sort. So I chose to stay in Vermont.
All right. I've got one more for you. Would you rather spend your Saturday at your college football game, or would you rather just hang out with friends, chill out?
I'm not a partier. I stay in on the weekends. I'm an honors college student, so I don't really go out much. So I really choose on my Saturday nights to stay in, do homework, maybe play like video games with my friends or something like that. So yeah.
Excellent. And again, on some campuses, there's a big culture of sports is really huge. And so lots and lots of students participate in that, whether they play or they just attend games. And other campuses that doesn't even exist, and everything in between. And even if you're on a campus like that, sometimes it's just well, I like everything else about the campus. I don't care if everyone's going to go to the football game. That's not what I want to do. So it's just something to think about. All right. So cost and affordability is a big factor. Obviously, you might think, I got my dream school here. This is where I want to go. And it turns out that in the end, you may not be able to afford it. So it is a very, very important to think about, factor to think about. The sticker price versus actual cost. If you stick around in this room, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the general thing to be aware of is that there is the price that the school puts out there, says this is what it costs to attend here. And then there's the price you might actually pay. So this college scorecard site I mentioned earlier can give you some hints of that. What is the average student pay at a school like that? And sometimes you can even get a little more detail about your own situation, but just realize that the price that's advertised is not what everyone actually pays, because there's financial aid that helps you to pay for that. Looking at things like debt and repayment is helpful, because maybe you have to borrow money to be able to go to school. That is true for a lot of students, but how much do you have to borrow? And what does that even mean? So, my guess is most students, if you're in high school and I say oh, what if you have to borrow $40,000? It's well, that's a big number, but it can be helpful to look at a calculator and say, if I have to borrow that much over say 4 years, how much am I actually going to pay every month? What does that really mean? It can help to look at that, the average indebtedness that a student has, and what does that really mean? And what might it mean for you? The student aid index is, it's a number you can get by filling out the main financial aid form called the FAFSA. And it's kind of a starting point for financial aid. If you go to the site, you can enter some information. It will give you that index and a little bit more information about what that might mean for you in terms of being eligible for need-based financial aid. So it's another tool. So in terms of like average awards for students with a similar profile, that could mean like similar to you, meaning family income, what is your GPA, your test scores, things like that. Again, there are some tools. There's a thing called the net price calculator that every college has. You can go on there and get a sense of how much might this school cost for me, for my family. It's not perfect, but it can give you an estimate, which can be really helpful. And then this New England Board of Higher Education, or NEBI. We'll get to your question. Hold on. It's another thing to think about, because for public institutions in New England, you can often get a break depending on the program study. It's actually somebody out here you can ask about who has the table out here, but maybe you want to study something like marine biology. You cannot do that in Vermont because Vermont is not on the ocean. But maybe you could do that at University of New Hampshire. They're going to give you a break on the price because they have an agreement within New England that, oh, students are studying in this major and they're from New England, we'll charge them less. So there's a bunch of majors where you can get a discount if you're a resident of New England going to a different state. So that's the NEBI, or New England Board of Higher Education Tuition Program. You have a question over here.
But also real quick, also ask your banks what scholarships they offer, because not only do they have loans, they do offer scholarships for students. You just have to ask them.
Is your SAI different depending on the school that you're applying to, and especially if you're applying to schools in Canada?
That's a good question. So is your SAI different depending on where you apply? No. That is based on your family size, your family income, your family's financial situation. It is mostly used to determine your eligibility for federal financial aid, and then schools will take that and use it in part for their own funding. So that's just based on your situation. That's why it's a good place to start, because it's not going to change based on where you're applying. Schools may use it differently, but it's going to stay the same. Even if you're applying to schools in Canada. That's a really good question. We do not have time to get into the cost of schools in Canada, but know that that is a good option. Sometimes they're less expensive. You can't always take all financial aid you might be eligible for to Canada. So I can get into that in the next workshop if you want to stick around. And then the final thing here is that we talk about sort of like, think about applying to schools where you might be able to get in. You're really confident, others maybe not so sure, and another one where that's kind of a reach for me. It would be great if I got in, but I'm not totally confident I will. You kind of want to do the same thing for the financial piece of it, where you're applying to schools where you feel like, well, if I got into this school, our family could afford it. Like, we feel really good about that. This school, maybe not so much. This one, like, I don't know, I'd have to get a bunch of financial aid for us to afford it, but I'm gonna apply anyway just to see what happens. So it is a really important thing to think about, because you might get into that perfect school. When I started working with the VSAC, one of the very first people I talked to was this mom who was like in tears. She's like, my daughter applied to only one school and she got in and it's amazing. And they could not at all afford it. And they were going to have to borrow a lot of money to go. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where that's your only option. And you're like, we can't do this. So what do we do? So you want to do your research ahead of time and give yourself options in terms of where you apply. All right. So would you rather go to your dream school no matter what the cost, or attend your third choice school if the price is right? We'll skip this one because we're almost out of time. So finally, outcomes information is important to look at, because it's sort of like, what happens if students go to a particular school? So how many first-year students actually come back? So do students go and they're really happy, and they're like, I'm definitely going to stay here? Or do they go and they realize, ooh, I don't want to be here anymore, and so they don't come back? It can be a little bit tricky, because if you look at a school like Community College of Vermont, lots of school students go and they don't come back for a second year, but that's not the reason. They're not going because they don't like it. They're going because maybe they want to take a bunch of classes, or they only want to take a couple of classes, and they're transferring to a different program. So it's worth looking at the numbers and then trying to get a sense from the school of why that might be the case. And then how many students actually graduate. So if you have a really high number of students who graduate within 4 or 5 years, that's great. That says students are really happy. They stick around for a variety of reasons. And then finally, afterwards, when students graduate, do they go to graduate school? Do they get jobs right out of college? So here's some of the resources to share with you in terms of doing searches. So Big Future and College Navigator are two sources of like a college search where you can plug in the criteria and it will give you a list. College Navigator has probably more data than anyone could ever want to know. It's like all this pooled information on every school that's in there. And then in terms of cost and affordability, here are a couple links that can sort of give you some idea about costs at particular schools and affordability. Oh, the other thing is go to a college fair. So right here, we have like a mini college fair. There are a couple in New England. There's usually one in Southern Vermont. There's one, I think it might be at UVM this year. Maybe it's at St. Mike's that comes up in the fall. So if you're a junior now, it's worth considering going to that. Sometimes schools bring groups. Sometimes you go on your own. But it's worth going to a college fair because there are tons of schools there. So if you have some schools you're considering, you can ask them a lot of questions while you're there. We're going to skip that. All right. So some things to take with you. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So be open to lots of options. Again, you don't want to put yourself in the position of saying like, you only apply to one school because that's your dream school and you don't get in, or you can't afford it even if you do. Know the cost before you commit. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what it might cost you. You're not going to know for sure until you apply, you get accepted, you go through the process of applying for those funds you might be able to get. But you can get a sense. So you don't want to go in completely blind, have no idea what it might cost you. You can do your research, find that ahead of time, know what your preferences and goals are, your strengths and weaknesses. Can you get in? Can you not? Will you be successful when you get there? And then finally, like it can be helpful to have a team. So as you're going through this process, maybe your school counselor is somebody you really know well, you really trust. Maybe you have a VSAC counselor, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a neighbor, whoever it is, find, people around you who have gone through the process or even who can just support you in finding answers, even if they don't know. It can be really helpful to have someone in your corner just as you're going through the process because it's a lot. Okay, that's a lot of things. We're just about out of time. We have time for a couple of questions if folks have them. Excellent. I did such a good job. No questions. Thanks for speaking in the mic. Folks who are online can't hear if you don't use it, so it's really helpful.
So I had some friends who just went through this process, and they were talking about the difficulty of knowing exactly how much student aid your student is going to get until after you committed. Can you talk a little bit about that and the kind of ethical or not ethical nature of that situation? And are there some universities who will let you know before you have to commit and some that won't? And how can you tell? That kind of thing.
All right. So making that final decision when it comes down to the finances, typical timeline is you apply to a school and you will be admitted. Sometimes when you're admitted, a school will say, hey, we want to give you this scholarship, $5,000 a year, as long as you get a 2.0 every year. Now, that's not the whole picture. So then you apply for financial aid and you then get an award letter or an award package or just an award, and it will list other aid you're eligible for. So maybe you have a federal grant or a federal loan or another scholarship from the school itself. You add all that up and you cut to the bottom line of how much you will owe after that. All of that typically happens before you have to commit. So typically May 1st is the deadline where you have to say yes or no, and you put down a deposit that says, I'm committing to your school. You should have information about how much money you get to assist you before that date. So it'd be very unusual that you would have to commit and not know. It can happen. Like if you're on a wait list or something, like you might not get the full picture and you might have to commit ahead of time, but it's pretty typically schools are understanding that they don't want someone to commit and then not, blow it off because they just can't pay for it. They don't want that to happen either. So, all right, maybe one other question before we wrap up.
I'm also happy to talk about any student experience or attending the University of Vermont, or et cetera.
All right, well, I'm going to be here. I'm doing another workshop in here, so I'll have a couple minutes. But David and Rose are both here. They have great, very current experience. So if you want to stick around, you could ask them some questions for the next few minutes. And thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of the day.